So welcome to the second task, note and let go. Now to recap, mindfulness meditation, as I said earlier, is a method in which we are learning to respond wisely to life. If you remember the Zen tale I was talking about, the master was defining Zen as an appropriate response, or saying the meaning of the practice of Zen as an appropriate response, meaning that in any context, we want to be flexible and fluid in our responses so that we can respond wisely to each moment. If we have a set of rules and regulations for everything, that's not a flexible way of working with life. And because of the impermanent nature of life, we need to be fluid. We need to work with what's changing. But what are we responding to exactly? Life is sort of like a movie, if you can think of it that way. And the way it plays out in our minds is a bit like the movie screen. We have all these passing thoughts that come and go along this movie screen of our lives, which usually is kind of projected onto our experience externally. But when you close your eyes and you go inwards in meditation, you can really see this movie screen clearly. And if you sit yourself 10 rows back in the cinema, metaphorically, if you sit yourself 10 rows back, you can watch the thoughts passing by on this movie screen, the thoughts of, I'm really wanting dinner right now. I'm not sure why I'm taking this course. What is meditation good for anyway? You know, all these little things that come across this movie screen. We don't have to be as involved in those thoughts as we think we do. Often we think that our thoughts are part of our identity, but by sitting back and watching this movie screen, you begin to see that your thoughts come and go, and sometimes if you invest no energy into them, they just pass by without leaving much of an imprint. Now remember this, because this is going to be important when we go into practicing this second task of noting and letting go. The key to success in the second task is being able to be an observer of your own thoughts as they play out on the movie screen of your mind. By becoming an objective observer of our thoughts, we can choose how do we want to respond to the storyline that's playing out in that movie. And we have a lot more choice in how we want to respond in that moment. Have you ever experienced one of those nagging thoughts that sort of orbits your consciousness over and over again? Maybe it's a thought about a fight you had with your partner, or a thought about something stupid you said at work, or even maybe a thought about a recent purchase you made and you didn't get a great deal and you feel like you've been ripped off. I'm pretty sure you can relate to what I'm talking about here. We all have these nagging thoughts that orbit our consciousness throughout the day, and we actually spend so much time and energy invested in these thoughts. Either we're trying to swipe them away by working them out, or we're trying to sort of put them under the proverbial rug. We're trying to put them under the carpet so that we don't have to deal with these thoughts. But both approaches take a lot of energy. The Buddha himself said that what we focus on will expand. You know, what we put our energy into is going to obviously expand. So if we're putting energy into swiping away nagging thoughts or putting them under the carpet, we're actually investing energy into growing them. We're giving those thoughts sun and water so that they end up expanding more. This is not really an approach that works conducively with meditation or with life in general, because we end up getting lost and tangled in our thoughts. There's a really good model that my meditation teacher, Michael Stone, taught me about how thought patterns work, and I'd like to share that with you now. I was talking about how these nagging thoughts tend to loop. There's a traditional term for this. It's called chitta vritti. And chitta is our consciousness. Vritti is is literally translated as a whirlpool. And it's basically, when put together, the thoughts of consciousness that loop around and around over and over again. So these are those thoughts that are going around your consciousness, orbiting them, as I said before. What happens over time is that these thought patterns, these chitta vrittis that build up, they tend to gain more and more momentum. They go from passing thoughts into storylines, eventually into belief systems. And when we're really invested in them, or when we're trying to resolve them through our thoughts, a bit like I used to do with my anxious thoughts, back in the day when I was telling you about anxiety, I used to try and go into the anxious thoughts and resolve them through thinking. And all this seemed to do was create what I call mind snags. Now, mind snags are when our thoughts loop around so much that they become entangled. They actually kind of snag in on each other, and if you try and undo it with thinking, it doesn't really help. The best way to describe a mind snag is through an analogy, a fishing analogy. So when I was living in Singapore, my dad and I used to go out to Malaysia, and we would go fishing a lot on, Pulau Rawa or some of the islands off Malaysia. And this is where I first learned how to fish. And basically we would cast our rods off into the ocean, we'd sit there with the bait, and every now and then my fishing line, if you've ever seen a fishing line, it's very thin, used to get snagged on something, snagged on a rock, or snagged on the jetty as I was reeling it in, or snagged on a greedy crab claw that had grabbed it. And I would often sit there and try and pull at this fishing line, trying to unsnag it, and my dad would be like, no, because it would just get worse, it would just get more snagged. He'd come over, my dad, and he would take a pair of pliers and he would just cut the line. And in doing so, he would just say to me, let's just start again. And I think in meditation practice, it's very much about this. If you try and follow your thinking that's distracting you, if you follow these mind loops and try and investigate them too much, they get snagged like the fishing line, and you can't unsnag it. It's too tangled. But if you just take a pair of pliers and cut through it, suddenly you can start again. So what is that to do with the second task? Well, the second task is a way of us cutting through our mind snags, coming back to our anchor point, and starting again. The way we do this is through a traditional Vipassana technique called labeling or noting practice. It's very simple, but when used effectively, it can really get us out of those mind snags. When we do noting practice, we observe the thoughts that are coming up in the mind, and we label them as an objective observer, just how we see those thoughts. For example, if I'm feeling really tired and I'm starting to fall asleep in meditation, which is likely something that you'll do, you just note feeling sleepy, or sleepy, or you can even put the word just in front of it, so just sleepy. So falling asleep, you just say to yourself, sleepy. If you're hungry, just note hunger, or hungry, just hungry. And you can use this for other things. If you have lots of thoughts coming up, you can note thinking, just thinking. Whatever thoughts are passing, you just label them as you see them. And in labeling them, usually you want to label them twice because it kind of adds that cut to it. Thinking, boom, cut, come back to the anchor, come back to the breathing, come back to the sound. And then when we do this, it keeps us away from the storyline behind those thoughts. It keeps us disconnected so that we don't invest so much energy, and it allows those passing thoughts to remain passing thoughts, as opposed to them becoming belief systems, really, or becoming mind snags. So in this meditation that I'm going to give you on the second task, we're going to practice noting and letting go, and then coming back to the anchor point of meditation.